Welcome to another episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club. It is I, your stony-skinned, three-legged, shambling, weird mycelium coming out of the top of my head, host Cameron. And with me today, as he is always keeping me in line with his whip, is the duelator himself, Drew. Drew, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great, and this week we're going to be covering chapters 30 through 33 of the first book of the series, Empire of Silence. It's an extra chapter than usual just because we thought it was the right thing to do this week. Pumped for it.
We're about to meet Xenos for the first time in this book.
For the first time, that was the big cliffhanger from last time. We got some interesting things with some soothsaying in the courtyard here, and then we got
a lot of prophetic imagery in the last episode.
And, we got this old crow guy that was super standout, interesting character, throwaway lines about Hadrian being good for Colosso, and then ultimately ending with this idea that there's actually xenobites on Emesh. So we get to actually go see them now, which is really cool. So it's exciting.
And we begin with chapter 30, the umandh. The picture I have in my head at the beginning of this chapter is Hadrian here's like, what the F? Take me now. Let's go right now. At the earliest convenience, I picture Hadrian wanting to go and then meet these Xenos that he's heard about. He's probably asking a bunch of questions. They begin skulking on the outskirts of town towards the docks because remember, Emesh is this tropical sort of coastal built on coral reef type city. So very tropical, and fishing is a big industry here. So a lot of fishing boats do a lot of the work for sustaining the economy and sustaining the people. I like the line that he has at the beginning of the chapter, man does not live on vegetable matter alone, which is clearly a call to man does not live on bread alone.
Yeah.
But it also does some world building work. And he mentions the fact that Borisivo primarily subsists on farmed vegetables and fisheries that exist out on the docks.
Yeah.
So we know that by going in this direction that the Xenos are involved in the harvesting of this sort of sea life. And you could picture, like Japan or, coastal areas of the country that subsist a lot on fish.
Yeah.
That it's going to be seafood, kelp. There's probably a lot of that stuff that's in their diet every day. Just slipping it in there in the beginning of this chapter, he mentions the fact that Cat catches the rot and that it lays her low in the future, like says that this is before she got it really, really bad. So we've heard now definitively that Cat does not get off planet, right? She gets the rot and nobody survives the rot. So, but in this strange, fun moment, they get to go see Xeno. So I don't know why he just throws that in there for us.
He does this several times throughout the narrative, and people notice it. I think this is the first big time he does it. Earlier in the book, he drops hints about the future and stuff, but he will do this throughout this book and future books of just saying, "Oh yeah, this is kind of what happens," almost spoiling the end point here, and then we have to experience the moment with the suspense, knowing that something bad will happen at some point. Something that we, I think, mentioned way earlier in an earlier episode that I'd heard Stephen King talk about is this idea that suspense is not something jumps out at you. Suspense is something that the audience knows is going wrong before the characters do, and then the audience is to carry it with them, waiting for it to actually happen in the story. And he does this several times throughout the series here. With the start of the book, he tells us this big looming thing that's going to happen, and he's doing it again here. It won't be the last time he does it.
He almost does it to contrast the fact that she's at the peak of life, of her life here in this moment.
Yes.
To indicate that it goes downhill from here. This might be the peak. Is her having this excursion with him, or this period of her life is the peak period.
It does a couple of things too, because it's got a little bit of journey before destination.
Yeah,
the author very much wants us to focus on what's happening, not where is it going. But there's also,
while telling us where it's going,
right? While telling us where it's going, and then also there's a sense in which the contrast gives us this same kind of ugliness of the world kind of vibe that we were given earlier in the book, is that he's juxtaposing the image of, her full of life, rosy cheeks, and rotting away, dying in the same kind of thing. And you'd imagine that if you're writing this account, this is how this would kind of occur to you. As you're recalling the wonderful parts about Kat, you can't keep the image of her rotting away out of your head at the same moment, right? So your memories are both in this is sort of what happens to people when they grieve. A lot of times, sometimes they feel like their positive memories and emotions associated with a person get robbed for them because they have all this negative emotion attached to it. So suddenly a birthday is a sad time because your mom isn't there to be with you at your birthday or something like that. And so we have a similar thing happening here of this happy memory is tainted by the loss of Kat, even here, before we see it happen.
And this pairs well with the previous depiction that he gave of his experience seeing the plague as a whole. Now he's experiencing it. Presumably soon he'll experience it firsthand.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that thinking of this whole arc in his story is difficult to tell without Kat being like the primary example of that experience. So, but in this moment, she is just, laughing and happy and at the peak, trying to take him to go see these Xenobites known as the umandh. Apparently they are involved in crewing these fishing trawlers. And from what Hadrian understands at this point, having not seen them yet, they have 3 legs, they have flesh that's like stone, and their mouths are full of filaments that they use as arms. They don't have any arms. They use filaments that come out I picture it coming out of the top of their head, sort of like
a plant almost, like a
coral-like plant type
like
thing.
Pokemon-esque kind of vibes. It's very interesting. We've been given some brief descriptions of Sealsin are humanoid-ish. There's some differences, but they're kind of similar shape to us, although very different. This just feels super alien, completely nothing like anything resembling something we have any interaction with.
Even the Irktani that we hear about last episode are bird humanoids, bird-like people that can communicate and have language and things like that. These things sound wholly different. He then mentions the fact that when talking to Kat, other homeless people or other people on the lam they do not go to this area because they have this instinctual fear about the umandh, despite it being relatively easy to steal fish from this situation, from what we understand. She calls the umandh coloni, which in the lexicon defines coloni as intelligent pre-industrial races of Xenobites on human-occupied worlds, particularly in the Solon Empire. And then he goes through and talks about different examples of coloni that have been conquered. He mentions the Kavarat on Sad al-Sud, the Irktani of Judeca, and the Archbuilders of Ozymandias. I wanted specifically to call it Ozymandias here. This is a clear reference to Percy Shelley's poem Ozymandias, which is fantastic. And I'm actually going to read it right now because it's so short, but it is amazing. Percy Shelley, of course, was married to Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. So this is, it's probably my favorite poem that I ever had to read in school, but here it is. It's Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away. Great poem. I suggest everybody go read it 5 times and picture the image in your head. One of my favorite sci-fi tropes is the precursor race that is ancient and gone that was more advanced. I love that. I loved it in Halo. I love it in that picture of, this Egyptian pharaoh or whatever. But that kind of tells us about who these supposed arch builders are. Right? These arches, it must exist on this planet named Ozymandias, and they must be gone, right? They must assume that this race inherited these arches to some extent. We'll see. But he mentions them not only to say that, but rather, to show the examples of their this is not unique. This situation where there is this conquered race is not unique. Humanity
Right.
up to meeting the Cielson, really, were the only ones who were able to make it to these stars. They were the only ones who traveled far at all. And they're the only ones who, by that stretch, like, were able to conquer up to this point until the Cielson showed up.
Right. It's different. You know, we've got previous stories about Simeon the Red and Urshtani and these things, the Cielson being very different than the rest of these. You know, we get discussion about, you know, enslavement kind of happening, and there's some discussion about that, and the fact that, I mean, maybe this would have been the fate of the Cielson, except the Cielson we couldn't in this circumstance conquer them. They're too strong for us to actually do this to them.
Yeah. It's compared to, even directly in the text, the idea of sort of manifest destiny to some extent, which is the idea that the U.S. was sort of destined to expand across the whole North American continent whenever they made landfall, or, you know, the Western culture, colonizers or whatever, were destined to do that. There's a direct comparison to conquistadors, like Spanish conquistadors who conquered the New World in the name of God, gold, and glory, which is very much the feel that we've gotten when hearing about how the empire expanded out here, right up to this point. God, gold, and glory is what makes humanity great. And then the moment that they face any resistance, it's all out war until that's done. Kat, unfortunately, is scared of the umandh. So she's not immune to the same thought process. Cause she's seen them before, but
right.
She doesn't go to this area either. She's only going there because she thinks it'll make Hadrian happy. She says that even looking at them, they're just wrong. Like, the idea of them is wrong. It brings me to the idea of, if we were to encounter life elsewhere, how different our conceptions will be, right? We haven't yet experienced any of that, but there must be some primal, we've experienced it in movies to some extent. There must be some primal instinct or feeling looking at how life developed on a different world that would be inherently different than what we would have experienced seeing life on Earth.
Well, we can only really imagine things that are sort of combinations of experiences we've already had, or different degrees of experiences we've already had. We can imagine something that's spicier than we've eaten because we've eaten something spicy before. In the same way, if we create a fictional fantasy monster and we put it in a movie, it's sort of just a combination of the things we already have experience or understanding of. So even the umandh probably don't capture how alien something would actually be if we were to run across it. The sense of disorientation is probably something we couldn't even recognize until we actually witnessed them. It's a strange thing. The efforts of literature and movies to create something like the umandh still evoke that feeling because it's so dissimilar, but it's sort of composed of parts we could still understand.
Yeah.
It would be pretty amazing to experience something that was made up of parts we didn't even have a conception of. You can't even really conceive of it because we don't know what it would be. So yeah.
As they move closer to the dock, the first thing that Hadrian notices and hears is this droning. I sort of picture like Tuvan throat singing, sort of like not siren song, but like sort of deep tonal noise that is like not white noise, but that is elevated over the thing. And he just hears that as they're approaching these docks. They see these two fishing trawlers off of the Gulf or whatever, and he finds an entrance into the warehouse. Kat, the moment that this droning hits her ears, is just visibly different. She doesn't want to go, but she also doesn't want to be left alone. They see two duelators. Duelators, we know, are the slave drivers in the Colosso. They are the slave drivers here in this situation. They have whips. They're walking down the dock. And as Hadrian and Kat approach, they're able to do so masked by this droning that is drowning out all the noise in the area. And they shamble their way on top of the roof. He mentions looking at the umandh specifically as revelation.
Yeah, there's a great section I think is worth reading here. It says, the songs and operas, the holographs and poems and epics all say that the moment of revelation is a shock, a climax, an instant of crushing realization that alters the world. They are not wrong. Ask anyone who stood with me at Gottingen, who saw that murdered sun go down in fire, and they will confirm the truth of those tales. And yet we are quick to overlook the quiet revelations, the moments that dawn not from the chaos of the world, but from a hollow seed in the pit of one's stomach.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this is the first time that we've deviated and that we have different versions of the book. So I have the new
Tell
deluxe
me.
edition,
Tell me. I'm so
and what you
fascinated
just
by
read
this.
isn't exactly the same.
Read it. Do it.
When we met Christopher Rocchio at the gala, he mentioned the idea of us potentially using this version of the book instead because he smoothed over some prose. So how does that start again? One more time?
Yeah. The songs and operas, the holographs and poems and epics all say that the moment of revelation is a shock, which feels like a Dune reference for the record.
Okay.
A climax.
Totally different first line.
Yeah, tell me. I'm curious.
The poets are forever depicting the instant of revelation as a kind of shock, a climax, a flash of insight, forever altering the world. They are not wrong. Ask anyone who stood with me at Gadadin, who saw that murdered sun go down in fire, and they will confirm the truth of those tales. And yet we are quick to overlook the quiet revelations, the moments that dawn not from the chaos of the world, but from a hollow seed in the pit of one's stomach slowly unfolding.
Okay. Fantastic.
So yeah, he does smooth some stuff over. This is really good. I didn't think we'd hit things that quickly, but if there's something relevant, we're not going to go back and redo everything. If there's something relevant, maybe we'll have an episode down the line a year from now talking about the differences between the book.
Yep. Just know that there are technically a couple of different versions of this text. So there's the original, this is the paperback version, this is the original one, and he has a updated and preferred text that he created for a special edition. Doesn't change the content of the book, but there's some slightly different prose decisions that he makes that just smooth the sentences over or change them slightly. And so as we notice them, we'll probably just call to account. My suspicion is that a lot of the prose-oriented sections that jump off the page are probably the ones he smoothed over. So that'll
be interesting to see.
Yeah, really cool.
I like a lot of the prose sections that he has.
Yeah. As he's seeing this and he's seeing them, move, the light switch turns and he's like, they're singing. Like the sound is them. There's this moment where he puts the pieces together relating to this thing he's never experienced before. It's got to be such a wild feel. I can almost feel the feeling that he's describing without actually being there. It's just like everything, looking at an alien thing and being able to make a connection or relate to it, even though it's so different than you. It's like, oh my gosh, they're like, that's them making the sound. They're making this with I can't imagine. It's almost like a Jurassic Park moment where you like look over, you're like, oh my gosh. It's like this, really cool. Yeah.
But I just find it fascinating that he keeps dropping these big apocalyptic images like every once in a while just to keep us on the hook for something that's going to happen later in the series. Even though this moment, this revelation that he's having, he could have just omitted that. But I think there's an intentional thing keeping us driving towards, okay, we're still here on the journey, but let's not forget where we're going. The umandh, like I mentioned, these three-legged, stony, corally skinned beings that move things with their cilia are using these like tentacle like cilia to lift boxes and are doing manual labor. And these two duelators are in charge of making them do manual labor. So they are literally enslaved by the Empire at this point. They have these collars, like belts around their midsection that are in some cases chafing them and making what looked like stony skin appear more red. So they have a skin that looks irritated as this collar around them is, I won't say choking them, but chafing them. Hadrian is shocked at the idea that they're being used as slaves, but then Kat mentions the idea that, well, they are amphibious, so they can walk on the seabed and grab fish and, put them into a net or shepherd them or whatever. Then the duelator hits one of them, which makes a cry that sounds like elephants trumpeting or a whale's song. But Hadrian, it's just quite not either. It's quite in between. I think it's a great image because that's something that we can try and place, but not quite understand.
Also clever of Rocchio to use elephant or whale song. We relate both of those creatures to strange and large but intelligent, conscious creatures. So
and mammals, right? So not too far from us.
Yeah. Right. That description almost evokes a reflexive empathy, even though I don't know anything about these creatures, whether they're sentient or not. They just, because of the similarities we're experiencing, it evokes a feeling that they are. That's the moment where I start to really feel for them, is when they start to make noise in that way. Even picturing something similar to an elephant or a whale just evokes empathy for me. Yeah.
The umand, after being hit, sinks to a knee. He mentions it's wilting like a flower and then drops its wicker basket, after which point the dooliter starts swearing at this umand, who he calls 17. So again, a dehumanization of this, or a lack of recognition of sentience on the behalf of this creature. He calls it by a number, not by a name.
Yeah.
And he sees that one of them is holding the whip and the other one next to him has this machine that has a bunch of dials on it that is creating this drone noise to communicate with them. And he recognizes the horror of, Hadrian recognizes the horror of the moment, but also recognizes, like, I want to learn how that machine works and how they think, right? So we're seeing a dichotomy right now of, there's the horror that Hadrian has experienced looking at Colosso and slavery and the structure of the empire that he feels is morally incorrect, and this insatiable desire to know more about beings that are not like him and to be able to communicate, right? His love of language, his desire to speak and be understood and known, and to know everything, right? To gather all that arcane knowledge. And we're seeing hit home here.
Can you imagine the dissonance of seeing an alien for the first time and also seeing the alien being tortured in some way? Because it's the wonder and the terror in the same moment. It would be a very strange emotional experience for a person.
I mean, conceptually, yes. That being said, how many in our popular culture and science fiction, how many times has that happened, right? I mean, the biggest movie, the most expensive movie franchise in the world is about, like, fighting back against the slavery and oppression of humanity, right? I mean, the Avatar movies are that, right? So I would like to think that I wouldn't be surprised. I hope that I would try and stop it to try and understand. But humanity being that cruel and subjugating, I wouldn't be shocked. I think it's inherent.
Not a huge fan of those movies.
That's fine, but they recognize the fact that they're the most expensive movies ever made, right?
They're
they get $1 billion.
Most pretty movies ever made, probably.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is not a diatribe on them in particular, but the point I was trying to make is essentially it has permeated our pop culture that humanity is in that situation likely to try and subjugate anybody that they run across, if possible.
I could see that happening, sure.
That person with the dials mentions that the umand is apologizing to the dooliter, and then the dooliter just says, yeah, darn right, and then hits it again. So it's just the word apologizing at this point flips the script, where we are no longer dealing with elephants and whales, right?
Yeah, completely. Now there's no room for anything like it. If it's communicating in that way, there's no room for skepticism at that point. Any reasonable skepticism, right? These are intelligent creatures capable of communication, and this person's beating them for bad reasons. It's not good.
At that moment, the slaver then stomps on the umand's midsection, and it reminds Hadrian of the gladiators in Colosso that were stomping on the faces of the mutilated Cialsan slaves. And that same feeling is evoked of his desire to do something, but his powerlessness in the moment to be able to change anything. The gears of the empire, he mentions, grind their human chaff to powder, and it is only the rarest creatures who endure. The idea that certain coloni have the ability to increase in stature, let's say, right? It mentioned in the Simeon the Red story that the Irktani are being considered to be citizens, right? We know citizenship in the empire is a huge thing, similar to that of Rome. If you are a citizen, then you are at least in the social structure to some extent, and I assume that would make them probably not serfs, but not patricians, if we're looking at this sort of caste system. But anybody, only the strongest of that are able to survive to that point. And it appears that humanity is doing nothing but subjugate these people, and the umand are incapable at this point of enduring the suffering that the empire is grinding upon them. In this moment, he mentions that he's not a hero, right? He's just a thief. He can't do anything else. The slaver continues to beat the umand, at which point it starts bleeding yellow glutinous fluid, even so much so that his coworker says, hey, you should probably stop. Initially, Hadrian attributes this comment to mercy, but then very quickly, humanity rears its ugly head again. And the second dooliter says that they'll lose part of their bonus if they find another umand dead, right? If the overseers above them find another umand dead.
I'm reminded of the previous episode where we were talking about the state in which Hadrian's in. We were having this conversation with Old Crow where we were given this idea of, what you are doing matters and what you're headed towards is really important. And the idea evoked for me is that Hadrian was given this sort of seed that was planted that his existence has to be something different than just thieving. And it feels to me in this moment that this is like sort of watering that seed a little bit of Hadrian witnesses an injustice, but is powerless to interfere with it because of his position and what's going on right now. So I'm wondering if even in this moment, even if it isn't explicitly said, is that this is sort of adding a little bit of water to the seed that has been planted at this point, of just a little bit more motivation of wanting to change our position. I want to be on the stars. I want to be able to intervene when injustice happens, like just like small little moments that are sort of stacking on top of each other.
100%. When that happens, the droning around them shifts to a sound similar to a heartbeat, which at this point, the umandh are communicating back to the other translator saying that they want their friend, number 17, to go to the surgeon. And the duelator who beat the umandh complains, but then acquiesces, and they let the umandh carry the hurt number 17 off to get help. At that point, Hadrian grabs a bunch of fish, even enough to share with other people that are around them. So they're trying to help other people that are less fortunate than them in this moment, and then they escape back. And that's where we end chapter 30. We move on to chapter 31, Mere Humanity. This is where things get really nasty. We begin by ruminating on the gray rot in particular and explaining how thoroughly it ravaged Imish.
I think I want to read part of this section because this section really struck me. It's one of my most memorable sections from this book, actually, is this image here. Siddhartha found more than poverty when he escaped his father's palace. He found sickness too, as did I. The gray rot had been on Imish for some years, brought by some unscrupulous trader from off-world. The natives had no immunity, and the animalcule chewed through them like a paper and festered in the street. I was Palatine. I was immune. Mother Earth, have mercy on me. Have you ever stopped to think what it would be like to sit in the belly of an epidemic? Untouched by it, I felt like a ghost. My body's almost alien biochemistry, the legacy of tens of generations and millions of imperial marks worth of genetic recombination, preserved me from every weeping sore, every bout of necrosis, every bleeding cough. It sounds like a blessing. It is no blessing to watch other men die, even less to watch the ones you love waste away. When I started this account, I thought to skip this part. So painful was my loss of Kat. But I was wrong. She matters. She must matter. She held on longer than most, longer than could have been believed for someone so small.
Again, he's comparing himself here to this religious figure. And I can't help but notice the fact that, no, I cannot imagine what it is like in this moment to be unable to be afflicted and to be amidst all of it.
Yeah.
I imagine that is a tough weight to bear. But the idea that it is not a tougher weight than what these people are experiencing, it sort of reads to me as very, very privileged. And he's putting himself on this sort of prophetical level as a Siddhartha, right? Like a Buddha-esque figure. And I'd be remiss to mention that, that is kind of insensitive, right? It's kind of insensitive. Although he cares about Kat in this moment and he sees people that he's losing and, has seen this plague take over and destroy half the town or tons and tons of people wherever he lives. He is so lucky and so blessed. And there's no gratitude here in this moment from him. It's just, it reads to me as complaining, although it be interesting to experience that in that moment, he's sort of setting himself apart in a way that is sort of distasteful to me, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think there's a way to read it that way. There's a way to read it as almost a weird kind of active survivor's guilt kind of thing too, where
that's fair.
Because, it would be a weird situation. So for example, like if you got shipwrecked and your bros are starving that were on the ship with you, except you're immune to hunger for a while, that would be a pretty strange experience. You probably couldn't relate to the actual feeling and experience of being in the plague or starving, but there would be like a weird sense of disorientation of like, I can imagine almost like a, like, why do I deserve to be unaffected by this? Like, just because I was born this way, I don't have to die with the rest of it would just be a very strange thing psychologically to experience, albeit very different. Um, there's a sense in which, people's positive attributes can make them feel guilty sometimes. Like, it's like, you see people do this sometimes with like, if they have a lot of resources, they're well off, but they have some problem, they're depressed or they're anxious. A lot of times these people don't allow themselves to feel sad or anxious, or they like whip themselves for feeling negative emotion because other people have it worse, kind of thing. I'm wondering if at some level there's something going on there. It's probably better to be privileged and upset than to be suffering and without resources, but it is a unique experience that's worth exploring. So I think you can read it in a couple of ways. Like, it's possible he's being too dramatic and he should give more.
Well, this is also narrator Hadrian that is expressing this, right? So this is in retrospect, not necessarily in the moment. So maybe he's had more time to think about it or whatever, but I am not convinced with present day Hadrian in this moment having this wherewithal at 21 years old or 22 or whatever age he is, right?
Maybe so.
I don't know. It's interesting nonetheless to consider the motivation. Regardless, he is unaffected by this animalcule that has taken over, which is like a tiny microscopic being that is giving the rot to all these people. They mention that he had left her in a storm drain high above the main track of the tunnel beneath the stock exchanges on High Street. So he's up towards the White District where he's left her, presumably to go get things to take care of her. He mentions the smell of the weeping sores that are all around, that, you cannot escape the reality of everybody being affected by this except for him.
Yeah.
And he's ruminating on the idea that he knows that she's not going to make it. His only friend, his one true friend of the last 2 years, will be gone and he will be alone yet again. So that I can sympathize with, of the idea of, now I will be truly alone again. Even if I'm not affected by this plague, this person that I've grown to care about and love will be gone. So I can resonate with that. Not the, it's so hard to watch everybody else suffer. Sorry.
Well, I just stand here and brood in my corner.
Yeah. Exactly. He then ruminates on the fact that they had squatted in a house for a week. He's replaying the events since the last time that we'd seen them on the page, since the situation with the umandh. Apparently they had squatted in a house and played house for the week. And in doing so, whenever they got caught by the people who were, owned the place, or the prefects that had come and taken them away, they tore the curtains off, which Kat is now using as a blanket in this moment. So the blankets that she has are these curtains from this house that they have squatted from. And it is important that the curtains have hyacinths on them. Specifically, this plant, this flower, the hyacinth, is important. But Kat is sleeping and being sick, shivering underneath these curtains. The narrator then reflects on, surprisingly, Kat having more opportunities for gainful employment because she belongs on this planet, that he's unable to go and try and get a normal job because they're going to ask for a blood test. And this is when they were playing house too. And they were, regardless of that, they were alone. They were pretending to be in a world that they could not. This is their one moment that they get to pretend, at least temporarily, to have a life that they've dreamed about, right? And it's really small. It's in this squatted house. They don't have gainful employment, but maybe they have some excesses where they hadn't previously. They're happy, they're naked, and they're clean. And now he contrasts that against, they're in a storm drain, and Kat is draped in these curtains that wrap around her like funeral garlands. He then goes on to try and understand, like, imagine, here's the part that I have a hard time being empathetic with. Hadrian has never been sick. The closest he got to sickness, he mentions, was when his grandmother's mind, after 700 years, had gone away. Like, she'd, after 700 years, experienced dementia or something like that. So his even noticing sickness in this moment is something that is all alien to him here. And he's sort of comparing that to the fever dream that Kat is in this moment. And then he's struggling with the idea that her life is over at 18 years of age, right? She's younger than him. His life is over at 18. He's older than her and he's going to live way, way, way longer. And the idea that she is going to die at 18 is really affecting him. So it's hard for me to empathize with this position because mortality is so different for us compared to him.
Well, it's like, one of the things I really appreciate about this is it gives us a really big sense of human scale in a way that we maybe wouldn't experience if we didn't get a character this close to Hadrian dying. It's very easy to casually say the Sun Eater lives for 1,000 years. Like, it's easy to say that, but the structure of this world is such that there are, presumably billions of cats on however many planets dying at young age or dying in squalor as Palatine lords live for centuries. It really gives you a sense for the scale of the tragedy of the disparity in human life.
At this point, he's the only one that can take care of her too. So he's the one going out into town. And lucky for him, he's not affected. So he has the ability to up and leave. I mean, you wouldn't want a better caretaker in this situation than somebody who's unaffected by it. But he does not have access to the proper medication that would be able to help Kat, unfortunately. But what he does have is access to soup. So he goes and he fetches her soup, which I resonated with this next piece because my wife does not like carrots. She doesn't like carrots in her soup. And he made it a point that which I love, carrots in soup is just
classic.
The best, right? It's classic root vegetable, but Kat doesn't like it. And Hadrian brings her soup that does not have carrots and he just starts talking to her as if she's awake. I imagine that this isn't the first time that he's done this. This is probably, he's gotten used to doing this because she's in fitful sleep.
Yeah, it's like being at somebody's hospital bedside or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Have you ever been around a dying relative?
No, I actually have not done that yet. The people that I've lost at a distance. I haven't
Suddenly,
been in.
I
was like too young to go or something like that.
I resonate with the idea of being there and talking to them as if nothing is wrong, to try. And part of it at least comes from the idea of the lack of acceptance, I think, in that you don't want to admit that they're not the same. The other part of it is empathy to some extent, wanting them to feel like it's normal still and still treat them with dignity like you would have if they weren't sick. But she stirs and has not woken up. And I imagine that Hadrian's is speaking to her because that's what he's used to. He starts telling her the news of the day that he heard from broadcast, hoping that the sickness is going to burn itself out. Conspiracy theories that this, plague is a weapon used by the Cielsen to deplete the people of Imesh. And ultimately he gets to the point where he wishes that he knew how to help her better. He just can't, he does not have access to anything that's ultimately going to give her any resolve or any help.
Very frustrating, because he can't get the sickness, but I'm sure he would very much like to be able to help her. And he can't do anything. He's just has no control over this, just for all of the advantages he has, he can't fix this.
Yeah. He is noticing in this moment as he lays his hand on her forehead to feel her fever that she's getting weaker and weaker, and she's probably got 1 to 2 days, not very long left, a day or two or a week. There's not very much time left, and then immediately moves on to it wasn't fair, as if anything that he has experienced or anything in his life has been fair up to this point. Fairness doesn't exist in our world. I think it's very poignant that Hadrian is the one delivering this message because he's had every possible advantage in this society, but the world isn't fair. And this is Hadrian sort of realizing it in a more humble or tangible way than he has. I mean, this whole arc is him realizing that to some extent, right? The world not being fair, him not making it to two crows or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think Kat suffering in this moment is the first time he is realizing, this world is not fair. He's struggling with suffering as a construct, as something that they experience, right? Why do we experience suffering? Why do serfs experience suffering if they're just as human or more human than we are?
Well, and I think there's a part too is he's some bratty kid, right? that
Yeah.
is born with advantage for no reason, and she's like a good person that helped him and didn't have to, and she's just dying in a gutter somewhere for no reason, right? Just because she got sick on this planet that she didn't pick to be born on. It is unfair. It's
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
unfair. There's
Yeah.
no reason that it should have happened this way from just like a pure human perspective. That's the way it feels, and so I'm sure that the unfairness of that screams at him while he's just sitting here like nothing's wrong. Just completely immune to this. It is wrong. It is unfair.
He begins unwrapping her bandages on her triceps and then sees the disease that is eating away at her flesh, applying new bandages and salves as he has while she is still asleep. And as he's doing this, he is thinking about the two rare experiences that he has had with death prior, right? Kat has experienced nothing but death in her whole life. She at 18 years old, lost her mother, which the idea to Hadrian is so foreign. The only people that he has lost are his grandmother, who he mentioned was senile and 700 years old, and then his uncle, who died in like a freak flyer accident or whatever. He ponders the fact that they both got these funerary processions, which we've heard about before, where he's carrying her eyes in a canoptic jar. There's all this pomp and circumstance, and yet the unfairness really hits home when she gets nothing. She maybe gets thrown in a canal or whatever. She's not getting any of that. He will be the only one that remembers her at the end of this. She starts stirring. Have you heard of the concept of like multiple deaths, like the multiple deaths that a person experiences?
You're gonna have to describe. I could guess what it is, but I don't know.
There's the initial physical death of the body, right, where somebody dies initially, and then there is a secondary death, which is the last time that your name gets spoken or the last person that remembers you dies, right? So it is not fair that Kat's life is being cut short in this moment, but in a poetic sort of way, she ends up living long. For anybody that reads this text or that finds this text in universe, she will have lived longer and have had more of an experience or is more connected to a person of, what do you call it? A person of great renown, like a great man. She had more of an impact on Hadrian, who had an impact on the universe, than a lot of people could say.
Because he chose to include her, he considered not doing this because it was painful to write. People that have journaled or written like grief letters or these things will know that writing is, as a form of expression can be very painful and difficult. And so there's a feeling that even after many, many years, he wanted to avoid doing such a thing. And the thing you're describing is the thing that outweighs his personal concern. Is that it's more important that she's remembered than I relive this uncomfortable thing. So I'm going to do it precisely for the reason you're talking about, is if this is a historical document, she becomes a part of history rather than being just this person that died in a gutter on a mesh for no reason.
She is a big part of his story at this part in his life. So
yes.
She then wakes up and then begins to barely like speak. You can tell she's weak. She's only answering in like 2 to 3 words max. She asks why he's here, right? She's shocked at the idea that he is here in this moment. And Hadrian, of course, is comforting her, saying that she is clearly his favorite person on this planet. Where else would he be? She laughs, which then turns to coughing, which, takes the joy out of the moment away.
Mm-hmm.
And Hadrian is biting back tears as this fit of coughing brings up blood and mucus. But just like anybody in any situation to some extent that is in this scenario, Hadrian is trying to be positive to her and saying that it's going to be all right. You're going to get better, because it's been proven, right? The idea that a positive outlook does have positive results in helping somebody come back from serious illness, right? It's not a guaranteed cure all, but positive outlook or remaining positive to some extent does have better health outcomes than being negative does, right? But I did want to ask you in this moment, is it ethical to lie to her on Hadrian's part? Because he knows in the chapter, like on the same page just above, he's like, she's got a week at most. Is it ethical for him to be doing this?
So I don't like lying at all. Okay. I don't even like white lies. Okay. We may not do Santa because I don't like lies. So
what?
I'm pretty serious on the lie thing. I take it very seriously. I'm conflicted about this because this isn't the highest stake situation related to lying, but it's pretty close. You know, this is one of those situations where you really want to comfort someone and not amplify their suffering with despair and all these things. I could see reasonable people coming to different conclusions. I will say I do worry sometimes that this idea of you're going to be okay has more to do with the comfort of the person that is living than the person passing. Like they need to, and I don't know if it's the case, but the person that's passing, I mean, I think a lot of times you say that they know you're bullshitting them, right? I don't think that you're fooling anybody. I think it's really wishful thinking that hopefully you can talk them into thinking that they're okay. A lot of the time, I've never been in this situation, so I don't know. But I think when one is tempted to do this kind of a lie, it's probably pretty straightforwardly not the case. I'd rather, it's my intuition that I would try to comfort someone differently. Like I might tell someone it's going to be okay and that I'm going to be hearing all these things. And those things I actually believe to be true. I won't say you're going to get better. Like I may not say you're going to get better, but I might say it's going to be okay. Right. So I would probably just try to comfort a person.
That brings up an interesting point of like, I imagine people in hospice care do not say it's going to be okay, or like do not say that you're going to get better, right?
Right. But
and she's in hospice care for all intents and purposes.
You can comfort someone without lying to them, you know, like, you know, everything's going to be all right in some other way, or I'd probably use different language if I thought it about longer. Comfort is important, but the more I think about lying, I usually think that there's a better way to do it if I'm a little bit more creative. And so if there was no other way and you could know that it had the maximum effect of someone felt perfectly good before they were going to pass, maybe it would change the math or something for people. I would probably tend towards, I'm going to comfort this person in a way that I get to be honest with them in their last moments.
Maybe I didn't consider this until now, but maybe he's lying to himself in this moment.
Right.
Maybe he is doing this because he has to believe to some extent that there's a possibility that she'll be okay, even if he knows that in his head that's not the reality. She has accepted this, and she mentions the fact that he doesn't have to stay. She knows that he's bullshitting her.
Yeah.
And she says like, hey, you don't have to stay, at which moment he sees the fact that some of her teeth have fallen out, indicating her lack of health in this moment. She knows that she doesn't have long. He says, don't say that. I tried to smile, but I could tell the expression was only pained. You'll get better. We both knew I was lying. She was half a corpse already, her once fiery eyes soft with fog. One, I thought, was blinded or else had gone beyond sight. How fast she had changed. Mere weeks before, she had been whole and hale and healthy. Who was this ghost? And then he refers to her as an echo, right? Like she's less than a full person at this moment. She's an echo of who she was.
Yeah. One of the things I hear people talk about cancer, actually, you know, because I talk to people about illness quite a bit, you know, people have lost people and things. This is actually what people describe to me a lot, is it's very hard to see somebody waste away. There's something very specific about not just losing someone, but seeing someone made to be less than themselves because of an illness. There's something particularly terrible about seeing it happen, because there's no getting around the fact that, you know, the best amongst us can be brought low by illness and made to look, you know, less than human by various conditions and illnesses. It's really terrible what can happen to us folks. I'm glad that he is giving us this portrayal of, you know, there's this lively woman who we're seeing this happen to in this story.
Kat, then, knowing that she doesn't have a lot of time left, chooses her words very carefully, because she probably doesn't have a lot of will to speak, right? Or ability to speak anymore. She makes him promise that she won't be burned in a funeral pyre. She doesn't want to be burned. That's the last thing that she wants. And so she insists that he promise her, and he does promise that that Hadrian will not let her be just cast away into ash like another unknown body. She wants a better death, or a better burial than that. And I want to read this next portion of it on page 207, which says, we believe our lives coherent things, that they have meaning, direction, focus. We tell ourselves we have a purpose, just as the characters in a play each have a purpose. We tell ourselves that everything happens for a reason. How many priests of how many dead gods have taught that lesson? Kat taught me something else, dying in that storm drain for no reason at all. For some questions, there simply is no answer. Why is chief among them? Why? I asked it many times, seated in the dark beside her shivering form. Why? I'm wiser now, and know better than to ask. I could not help her. I could not even die with her. I could only watch her die. This strikes me as two different things, right? That one, it's love the idea and discomfort that even though he's trying to give her, he's not doing a particularly good job of. We can be comforted with people that we love around us to some extent. And I can't imagine going through death. Nothing is sadder than somebody who is dying alone, right?
Yeah.
At the end of their life.
Yeah.
Because ultimately death is something that we can only experience by ourselves. The other piece of it is this is a clear, I think this is the first on the page blatant questioning of the problem of evil being brought up in the story. This is the case that we constantly think about and struggle with when dealing with our perceptions of the world, right? Why do good people that have the least amount of circumstances end up dying in a storm drain? It's tough. It's tough to think about, and it's actually getting me. I didn't, in this first reading of Kat's, experience toward the end of her life, I didn't feel as deeply. This time going through this is way tougher because I have way more empathy for Kat as a character than I did in our first read through.
Yeah. This is another section actually that I think is slightly different in the original
really?
Text. Yeah. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, just read the different parts.
So we've got a similar story. We believe our lives coherent things, that they have meaning, direction, weft, that there is a purpose to us as there is a purpose to player in a drama. That, I think, is the soul of religion. Why so many people I have met, even my own brother, believe the world must be controlled, the universe planned and guarding. How comforting it is to imagine there is a reason for all things. Millions of theologians and magi and cult priests of 1,000 dead gods have taught us this lesson, and then the rest is the same.
That's very different.
Very different. Yeah, written by a younger...
Yeah,
written by a younger man in a different worldview at the time, actually, I believe. Interestingly enough.
Yeah. Was definitely more angsty in the initial writing of the book, but I actually appreciate it, the fact that he went back and did some changes, because thematically, if Hadrian has changed, right? Writing Hadrian from 18-year-old Christopher Rocchio's perspective versus, current day Christopher Rocchio's perspective, I understand the reasoning for him smoothing over some of the stuff, particularly in the first novel.
I think it works too, I mean, frankly, for all we know, maybe I have the different translation into classical English than you do in university.
Oh, interesting.
This is a in-universe document. Who knows? Yeah. Maybe mine is just a different document than yours, and the updated one is something.
Tor Paulus wrote a second edition.
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah. It's interesting. Maybe mine is, slightly different than yours or something. It's a cool thing. In universe, it makes sense. It doesn't even have to be. I actually think it's wise for us to be reading different editions so we can be able to notice these differences. It's really cool. Really cool. But yeah, as you're saying, problem of evil, the loss of this character. I appreciate actually that in Rocchio's storytelling, and it's very clearly set on the page here. Sometimes when we're reading fiction, it doesn't feel real, not because it's fiction, but because the authors are saying something with the work that is untrue, right? And one of those things that is said that is untrue in a lot of fiction is plot armor, right? And the idea that, everything has to have a reason and the pieces need to make sense. In life, sometimes the main character just gets hit by a bus and that's the end of their story, right? And so I actually appreciate that with his work, and this is the first example of that. But, sometimes things just pass straight through the narrative and don't seem like they have a rhyme or a reason. For our narrative here, Kat's passing has a significance for our main character. But for Kat's story, I mean, she grew up on this planet, got to have a coming of age. Her mom dies and then she dies and meets this off-world prince for 2 years and then just goes. And that's her whole story. And there's no straightforward ending to that. So she isn't the main character, but I think it's a good point, and I appreciate that in his writing, he doesn't feel the need to make everything feel plot armory or narratively perfect. There are things that get caught off, and fate doesn't always land well for everybody.
It's very human.
Yes.
Kat, in her weakness, asks him to tell one last story. And of course, he's still trying to be like, don't talk like that and all this different stuff. And she just doesn't want to fight with him anymore and just hopes that he'll read a story to her one last time. And he does. He brings up the hyacinths again, which I will bring up. I'll unpin that in just a moment toward the end. But before that, he tells her a different story, a story that she knew and that he knew almost as well as Simeon the Red. And now we get some world building around the tale of Kharn Sagara. She's heard this story before, so this is a comforting story for her to hear at the end of her life. He mentions that Kharn was born in a city of poets outside of the reach of the Foundation War, which we know is the war against the Mercanii on Earth. After the Mercanii were defeated, he was born the son of a great poet. Looking at this right now, I think the city of poets is a reference to Hyperion by Dan Simmons and to Martin Silenus' story.
I didn't even think about that, but you might be right. Yeah, that's interesting. It's named after Keats, right? If I'm remembering.
Yeah, John Keats. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I forgot. I didn't catch that, but you're probably right.
So I think the City of Poets is a direct reference to Hyperion. So nice little Easter egg put in there. He mentions that Kharn always dreamed of being a soldier, but being in a city of poets, the place he is from has never had a need for soldiers. He mentions this quote. This is sort of an inversion of the one that we hear, that we know those who will not live by the sword will die by one. Right? It's an inversion of those who live by the sword die by the sword. Rather, those who will not live by the sword will die by one. Eventually, the extrasolarians, who we've heard of as this big bad evil group up to this point, the boogeyman demoniacs, eventually arrive and they set fire to the city of poets. And he is the only one that fights back. He fights back against the exalted, who are the leaders, the kings among the extrasolarians, who eventually spare him while they implant machines in his people and make them crew their ships. So he had mentioned that he had seen in previous chapters ships that were manned by machine zombies, right?
Yeah.
And now we're seeing that even in this story that is sort of mythologized in universe, right? This is the novel that Gibson had given Hadrian with the introductory letter that he is saying. Or this comes from the same story as the novel, that we know that this piece is true, that the extrasolarians do implant people with machines and make them crew ships. If you look up Exalted in the back of the book, it is a faction among the extrasolarians that are noted for their extreme cybernetic augmentation. So they push the boundaries. The Exalted push the boundaries of cyber enhancements to human biology. He mentions that Kharn lives among them for many years, begins pirating across occupied human space in this area, and eventually, in a moment of revenge, turns the Exalted against one another, slays their captain, and then takes command of the captain's ship, at which point he sets course for Vorgosos, a frigid planet with a dead star, at which point he takes control of said planet. Hadrian mentions in the middle of the story that Cat's fingers go slack, but he doesn't stop telling it until the story is done, which I think is beautiful and poetic. But when he finishes it, he grabs her hand and he kisses it. He wraps her in the curtains with the hyacinths on them and then carries her light, lifeless body away. The hyacinths, I'll unpin this now, are a reference, I believe, to the Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which is a poem about a bunch of different things, but there's a bunch of references in here to that poem, particularly like the Phoenician sailor, when he takes her to the canal and then buries her body, like weighs her body down with stones and places it in the canal. This is also another reference to Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. So it's talking about spring being the death to winter and all this different stuff, but also a new beginning in some respects, right? A new beginning for Hadrian's life, at least. But I recommend people go read it. I would quote it and read it, but it's an extremely long poem. But I'm pretty sure that this is a reference to T.S. Eliot here, showing us his breadth of poetic knowledge.
Yeah. I love this line that he says when he kisses Cat's hand and says, "The end, only it wasn't." Funny thing about endings. Until the sun's burned down and all is cold, nothing is ended. The players only change. I like that, in this, we're given this juxtaposition of, Cat dies for nothing, for no reason. But we're also given this other picture, which is the story is not each individual person, right? The story is like something bigger than each person here and there. And in that sense, I'm sort of getting this thought of like, well, maybe the point isn't that each individual person's thing creates some narrative, but there's some grander narrative at stake. Like the ending is when everything goes out. That's the story, not
the heat death of the universe. Yeah.
Right. The story is when everything ends, not when each individual spark dies out. There's a bigger scale than just individual people. And maybe in some sense, that's what it's all about, and not that everything individually makes sense, but the sum of all of those parts makes sense.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I like that with the concept too that I talked about earlier of the second death, right? So
Yeah.
even because Hadrian's story is not done, he carries Cat with him
Correct.
in his story going forward. And he mentions that after, burying her, weighing her down with stones, he never returned to find her. She was gone from his life at that moment. But then truly alone, I turned away and made my way back to the world of the sick and the living. My own story was not yet done, which is beautiful. And that's where he ends the chapter. Did you have something you wanted to mention before we move on?
I was just saying, funnily enough, the Cat's story ends here, but she's kind of like it's like you're playing pool. It's like you hit the ball and maybe that ball stops, but it bounces off and sends the other one in another direction. It feels like that's what Cat really is for Hadrian. We had this, small little sub arc with Cat on the street here. And I think that we learned a lot about Hadrian, his experiences, and sort of restarted his desire for adventure, his desire to potentially right injustice, and set his eyes to big stories and storytelling in a way that he had lost being on the street by himself. So she does something really meaningful here. Even if she, quote unquote, dies for nothing, she really didn't. She through Hadrian has a really big impact on history through her care and kindness towards him. So I'm glad he chose to include her in his account. I think she's important.
Yeah, 100%. But not immediately. He doesn't immediately go and start doing well in the world. As we begin chapter 32, stand clear. Hadrian is put in media res in this story. He's out overlooking these prefects that have held up these minions of this. I had incorrectly mentioned Rels as a group. Rels is an individual, as like a crime boss that has street toughs. And we find more about that situation here because Hadrian has cast his lot with them, at least temporarily, to rob a store with some of Rels' minions. So in this moment, he is hiding, looking upon these prefects who have caught some of the people in the store. He has the bag, so he has everything with him. Meanwhile, the other people that he has robbed the store with are caught by the prefects. He notices the fact that this meager fortune that he has is still not enough to get off world. But this is the most violent that we've seen him in his, the moment Cat is gone, any morality around the way that he treats people sort of goes with her, at least temporarily. So he's either in mourning or it hasn't washed over him yet. He's still in survival mode, and it's me or anybody else at this point. The moment she's gone, he is alone.
He stabs a shopkeeper in the shoulder or something like that. And I think it's described as careening off the bone of it's really violent. Yeah. He's acting like a thug. It's not just casual. I mean, he's really done something quite serious here.
100%.
Shocked me actually. First time I was like, whoa, this is the kid that was all up in arms about helping people at Devil's Rest and stuff like that. He just stabbed a person for money. It's a total difference in the character at this point.
He goes from being Aladdin, stealing to help little kids who can't go get food on their own, to being a true thief, right?
Yes.
A thief who is unwilling to be caught and will use violence against people that are less fortunate than him. So the prefects have stunned a few of their minions, and they've caught and cornered a few of them, telling them to stand down. One of the minions is stunned and is face first in a puddle, at which point the street tough is like, hey, that person is drowning right there because you stunned them, and they're drowning in that puddle. So one of them just kicks the minion and moves them from the mud. There's a crowd that has amassed, just like with the crime scene, right? There's a crowd that is amassed behind these cordons, police tape. But in this case, I love the little world building thing of it's projected, right? So we're still in sci-fi. This is an actual police tape, but they're blocking off the crime scene with holograms and stuff like that, which is super cool. Tur, the biggest thug, then threatens the prefects, saying that I'm never going to turn myself in or whatever. And then he gets a stunner bolt in the chest for it. Cops then just ask for the money that they stole, but all the minions, and they're being truthful in this moment, are like, it's gone. We don't have it. We can't give it to you. At that point, the cops then ask them to surrender. And, if they're lucky, they can go to Colosso instead of going to the bone cutters. And the woman who is next to this other guy who just got stunned is like, I'd rather go to the bone cutters instead of Colosso, because Colosso is a death sentence. And then the cops just shoot them with stunners and then move on. And weirdly and strangely, Hadrian in this moment, seeing these thugs get gunned down, sees it as justice, because they are left without the bag and without winning, but he is, because they are the ones that beat him before Cat had found him. That's the one that the group that he was running away from when he was trying to get shoes was this street gang. So he doesn't feel particularly bad for the fact that,
Right.
they got comeuppance. But Colosso sticks in his mind again. This is the second time we get a mention of it. And he is now starting to take Crow's words. Now that he doesn't have Cat to take care of anymore or with him, he might as well think of joining Colosso because they're always in need for walking corpses.
Yes.
And he thinks about the fact that Crow had said that he'd be good as a myrmidon, and then mentions why. He ends the chapter saying, why didn't I do this sooner? So presumably this is not the first time that he's fallen in with this gang since Cat's death, but it's this inciting moment that reminds him, oh yeah, I can start again to some extent in Colosso.
Right. The seed that's been planted fully grows as, the insight from Old Crow turns into something real, like it was like a throwaway comment earlier, but, he's now decided to do this, which is interesting given what the folks just said about Colosso. They're like, send me to the bone cutters. The bone cutters sound terrible, and they would rather go to the bone cutters than to Colosso. And if you'll remember from the start of this novel, Colosso is really bad. we had a really not good picture painted for us of what Colosso is like. So terrible, in fact, that Hadrian walked out of it because he was so offended by watching it. And now he's considered participating in it. Radically big change for the character.
Yeah, but he also thinks about, it sounds terrible. And he mentions the fact that like peasants that go voluntarily often will die very quickly, right? He knows that it's not an easy path, but he does think about the prospect of this would be a way to earn a living. And we also presume at this moment that his willingness to do something reckless is probably higher than it would have been if Cat were still around, right?
Yeah.
So there's a recklessness to it, but also there's a possibility for him getting enough money to go off world eventually.
Also, I'm sure, we've got the moment with, just watching the umandh being hurt. And now we've got, the weight of the coins in the pocket while he's talking to Crow. And now we have this moment where Colosso's mentioned, well, he's got like a bloody blade from stabbing some shopkeeper. He's like, okay, like if I'm going to be violent, and it's at least Colosso seems on its face more ethical than just stabbing shopkeepers for cash. I mean, it's got to be better than that, right? So even if it sounds risky, it probably sounds ethically preferable for him as well. As like, this just makes more sense than what I'm doing right now. What I'm doing right now is completely not workable, especially with that Cat. Yeah.
100%. And so he makes the decision that he's going to go to Colosso, and we begin chapter 33 to make a myrmidon. So before officially signing up, he goes and gets a good night's sleep at a cheap hotel. He buys some new clothes and he shaves his head for the first time. So he cuts his hair and I imagine that this is probably a similar story to some people who are enlisting right before they go to basic training, right? You get your last, good night's sleep, you have a nice steak or whatever it is, and then you go to basic.
Yeah.
He mentions that Rel's thugs got sent to re-education by the Ministry of Welfare, and the Cathars, who I'll remind the listeners are members of the Chantry. This reminds me so much of, not only the, classic totalitarian re-education type thing, but it's particularly of 1984.
Yeah.
People get sent to these re-education camps and come back and they're different, right? And he mentions that that's what Rel's thugs ended up having to do instead of going to Colosso. Despite the fact that he has brand new clothes and that he is clean and is the best that he's looked in a while, he is still gaunt and looks like half a Cielson with his height in comparison to the local people. Will remind you that the gravity is higher than on Delos, and so everybody else is shorter and stockier than him. So he's skinny and tall and pale and has short hair. And so his skin tone and his height he compares himself to Cielson in this moment.
He's all height and lean muscle, pale skin, but he's just missing the horns and the big eyes. But other than that, just ropey, trim
Lanky
muscle. Yeah, exactly.
So he ends up going to the attendant at Colosso if they're taking people in the fodder pool. She is startled by his appearance, probably because of the fact that he looks gaunt and like a ghost in the Cielson, and then nods and gets taken into a back room in which he is getting examined. So he strips naked and is sitting on a plastic sheet like in a doctor's office. And then the narrator sort of gives us, again, a reiteration of the mechanics of the gladiator versus the myrmidon. The gladiators are the professional. They're like a pro sports team, like we'd seen on Delos with their names on the back of the jersey. They're the ones that get all the women. And then there are the myrmidons, or the fodder pool, who basically are forced to either come to commit a sentence to not be executed or go to the bone cutters, or come to volunteer for food and relative security before they die a horrible death at the hands of these gladiators. And apparently on some worlds, they just kidnap random planet-bound serfs just to feed them to lions in the games, which is even more dystopian, which harkens back to Rome too. But
Yeah.
he mentions that he was a rarer sort of fool. He was determined. He's not going to be one of these people that just goes in there and dies. And we know that he doesn't go in and die, right? His story doesn't end here. So he's going to escape this somehow.
Right.
But when he goes there, he expects them to just say, yeah, here, sign on the dotted line. It's your funeral, and move on. But he's now worried because he has to take this exam. And the medic enters the room and begins examining him. And he notices the fact that even the person that is doing this medical examination is a slave and a criminal who has her nose slit, her nostril slit, and on her forehead reads deserter. She then asks him if he is in this for fame or fortune. Hadrian in the moment says, no, I'm just trying to get by. But she mentions the fact that, you could have gone and been a duelator, like, and beat up the umandh, right? Why are you doing this? Why are you signing a death sentence to come here and fight? Why aren't you being a thug? Because you could have fit the bill they need people like you.
Yeah.
And she says, he mentions back, I'm not a thug, which is total hypocrisy from the previous chapter.
Just stab somebody. Just stab somebody for cash.
Yeah. But by examining his body, she can tell that he has known violence in his past. She can tell by his scars and presumably the life that he's not only lived here, but also his training on Delos and things like that, that he has suffered or is experienced with violence to some extent. She asks for his name. He gives her the name Hade. She's like, what is that short for? Is it short for something? And he mentions back to her and gives her his full name, Hadrian. And at that point, she probably was suspicious, being a medical examiner and seeing somebody as tall as him and as pale as him, that one, he's from off-world, but two, the name sort of indicates and confirms to her that she's not dealing with common stock at this moment.
Yeah.
Calls his name a fancy name. And then she gives him her name, which is Chand in this moment. She begins about to examine him with a stethoscope and all this different stuff. And he's like, is that 100% necessary? Don't you have scans that you could just reference here? And she says that sometimes the sensors get confused. It's better to listen. And then she starts running him through this series of tests, and he's getting more and more anxious because that he thinks that the jig is up. Yeah. She's going to take my blood, and then I'm screwed.
Yeah.
She can tell that he is tough, and his build would make him do well in comparison to a lot of the fodder that comes in here. And by the fact that her prodding and all this different needling him, trying to get information out of him, she mentions the fact that he's less likely to get scared immediately in comparison to a lot of the people that just go and piss themselves. He asks if they'll take blood, and he says yes. She's like, why? Why do you care if they take blood? Are you a drug user? He says no. She checks him for lice on his cut hair, and she can't find any, and she's like, such a shame. And Hadrian's like, why is it a shame that you hadn't found lice? And then she just drops a bomb on him and says, I've never known a Palatine to have lice before, have I? That would have been like a novel thing for me to see as a Palatine with lice. And Hadrian just immediately is like, no.
Yeah. Immediately tries to get out of the street, immediately found out. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
But at the same time, too, she's like, what do you think? I'm an idiot? Like, if I were not good at my job at all, maybe I would have been confused. But just looking at you walking into the room, I could tell that you were a Palatine, dude. Like, come on.
Yeah. You don't have to have the ring on and take your blood.
Yeah. There are genetic markers. Like, you can easily tell. And the moment he finds out that she knows that he's Palatine, he starts getting dressed. And it's like, I got to get out of here. Anytime taking of his blood gets into the moment, he's going to run away. Just as a note, I just checked the page again and realized that in this version of the book, her name is Chanda, not Chand. So there's another difference to point out in between the two versions of the novel. But Chanda blocks the door And he's like trying to get her out of the way. And he says, this is a mistake. You can't help me. She says, it's a mistake, was it? The slave's face arranged itself into a thoughtful expression, tattooed crime distorting as she cocked an eyebrow. Never met a Palatine as didn't want his name trumpeted from the sanctum's minarets. And he immediately claps back at her and says, I'm not a Palatine. And she says, yeah, okay, if you're not a Palatine, then I'm not a slave. I'm a member of the imperial harem. I'm a meretrix in the imperial harem. And I had to look up the word meretrix. And in the book, it says a madame of a brothel or an imperial Palatine's harem. It's also the Latin word for a prostitute and also the Latin word for a saltwater clam, which I thought was funny.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's like, yeah, okay, if you're not a Palatine, then I'm
a clam.
I'm the Queen of England. I'm a whore. But then she keeps probing him. It's like, why aren't you looking for the glory? You're a Palatine. You have better genetics. Hadrian is looking for a way to offset her in this situation. And because of a word choice she uses, the word momac, Hadrian can tell that she is Durantine by her accent. And so the language center of Hadrian's brain starts turning and he begins speaking to her in Durantine. By the way, momac is boy in Slavic. In various Slavic languages. If you look in the back of the book, Duranos is a republic with a few worlds that pay tribute to the empire. And so he begins speaking to her in Durantine, in her native tongue, and her eyes go wide because he knows her language. And then in Durantine begins saying, hey, I've got money. I can give it to you. Trying to bribe her. I don't want to be a lord. I don't think anybody should be a lord, which he's particularly saying, knowing that those in Duranos don't believe in lordship. Like they have a slightly different form of government before presumably they were absorbed into the empire. So he's leaning on her sensibilities of lordship being a negative thing. And as if that wasn't enough, he's like, if not, then this is your opportunity to send another one of those lords to death, right? You could just send me to death, rid the galaxy of another one of the Palatines. She still asks him why he wants this. And at this point in his life, he literally has nothing else. And this is the only direction that I possibly have. I don't want to be a thug on the street anymore. Please put me in the pool. And that is where the chapter ends. So we begin a new arc in Hadrian's story. So as we wrap up the street rat arc of Hadrian's time on Emesh, what struck you on this reading differently than last time?
So the themes surrounding, the end of naivete jumped out to me the first time, but I think that felt them even harder this time. This is sort of a coming of age story in some ways, and this is the sort of stereotype of a coming of age story of naive but hopeful dream that has something to it, being kind of crushed by some reality. This is sort of that defining, crushing moment for Hadrian living on the streets. And what really struck me even more the second time was the reigniting process for Hadrian. The characters that existed within this section of the story, Kat really hit with me in a way that I didn't previously appreciate. I did like her the first time around, but she really hit for this time. The wonder that they shared in their relationship for the stars through his limited experience and her lack of experience, in combination with a couple other characters that I found very interesting in this arc. The naked homeless guy yelling about prophecy of what is ultimately something like Hadrian's future, and in combination with Old Crow planting a seed not just for Colosso, but for the idea of living for the future and your character being defined by your actions. All of this sort of culminates in action for Hadrian to take a step past the hopelessness that he's been put in and to try to start taking control of his life again. And so we're sort of at that point where he's finally decided to take a risk and do something that may change a circumstance, although it's a risk. So I really liked this arc a lot on a second read through. People, I think, focus on the first section of this book being kind of slow. I really liked this. We had our first arc at home, then we had our second arc that sort of crashes down, and then we're going to kind of go into this next arc here. I'm really pumped to get into this next arc and have things pick up a little bit. How are you feeling about this arc on a second read through?
Yeah, the prophetic imagery shines through as the biggest thing that I overlooked the last time.
Yeah.
Right? This is a very interesting call to adventure in the Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's not he's had his prince arc where he is the prince and, wronged by the world, wronged by his dad, and the sort of Shakespearean drama in that respect. Then he has his pauper arc where he comes here, he knows nobody, he has no friends, and he has no prospects, but makes his way on the street. That sadly ends, and then he's now stepping into this next Myrmidon arc where he becomes the Myrmidon that the people of Borsiva know as Hade. So I'm excited to see how he develops from here. Loved Kat a lot more on the second read through. She strikes me as, since Gibson, the first genuinely good person that he has met in his story thus far. And so she shines through as the most important.
The two stories, I think, shine through too as well for me on a second read. Simeon the Red and The King with 10,000 Eyes of Kharn Sagara. I didn't, for some reason, latch on to the two because they were mentioned in their first arc and they're more fully explored in this arc together. I didn't fully digest them the first time. I'm glad on a second read through I paid a little bit more attention to those stories and what they mean to Hadrian moving forward. So those things as well. And we're going to be a gladiator.
Yeah, now we get Gladiator the movie, and I'm so excited about that. And as Hadrian continues his story, we also continue on with him, always forward
and always down.
And we will see you folks next time.
See you folks.
Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elson and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 30, 31, 32, and 33 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. Copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by DAW Books on July 3rd, 2018. Quality editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2026, Cameron Elson and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us, and remember, rage is blindness.